what do you hope to hear from the president tonight?
Well, I hope to hear the same thing he's been doing over the last few months, and frankly, that he did in the campaign, and he said he was going to do, and that is work to bring our country together, to express in civil terms his vision for going forward, his sort of normalness, if you will, rationality, good sense. I think he is going to bring that to this speech, and I think he's been doing that, and I think that's been good for the country, and I think the country is a little calmer and a little more likely to come together under the kind of tone that the president has set. And I think then he's going to talk about specific proposals, as he did in the American Rescue Plan, as he has in the American Jobs Plan, and now in the American Families Plan. I think he's going to be talking about both about the Jobs Plan and the Family Plan, and I'm sure he'll reference what we did in the American Rescue Plan. But all of that is designed to bring us out of any deep economic malaise or recession that we've been in, and bring us back to a vibrant economy, a growing economy. And of course, all the economists predict that the American Rescue Plan will do that, and the American Jobs Plan will do that as well. And the American Families Plan will make sure that we meet the needs of the American people, who are, many of whom are still struggling. They want to get their kids back in school. They want to have the availability of childcare. They want to have their jobs secure and available. And I think that's what the president's going to talk about. And frankly, I think the response around the country has been from a bipartisan perspective. We don't see that bipartisanship in the Congress, but I think around the country, what we see is many Republicans, not all Republicans, maybe not the majority Republican, but a significant number of Republicans who voted for Donald Trump are saying he's moving us in the right direction. It may not be perfect. We may disagree with some things, but he's moving us in the right direction. And I think they welcome, as I said, I keep talking about tone, but the last president created an atmosphere of confrontation and chaos, and no clear plan moving forward. Joe Biden is doing exactly the opposite, and I think that is welcomed by the country.
I do want to ask you about the American Families Plan, and we'll hear more about it in the speech today. But can you walk us through what this may look like legislatively? When can we expect Congress to take it up?
Well, we've had an outline of the American Families Plan. The president's talked about it. We had a briefing by the White House Monday night. He's sent out, there was a long story in a number of the papers today about the component parts which deal with families, which deal with education, which deal with healthcare, which deal with childcare, which deal with the ability of people to make it in America. That's a phrase that I've used, and the president uses, build back better as well. But I think that he will be talking about all of those thoughts today, and expand upon what we did in the American Rescue Plan, which we did a lot of things that were temporary in giving people help who were struggling and who needed childcare, who needed some help with income, the earned income tax credit, the child tax credit, other items that allow families to survive and get out of the struggle of day-to-day survival and get into a mode where they can live a middle-class, more comfortable life and a more confident life. And I think the American people welcome that and will be supporting it. And the American Families Plan complements the Rescue Plan, which is sought to do both the health and the economy immediate needs. The American Jobs Plan, which is a long-term investment in our infrastructure, in our water systems, in our broadband, on our grid, not just transportation issues, but issues that will provide for both human infrastructure and physical infrastructure investment, which will pay off. And then the American Families Plan, which is to try to deal with the inequality that we see in our society, where some people are really struggling, while some people have an extraordinary amount of the pie that is the American pie. So I think that's what we're looking to hear, and I think that's what we're going to hear. And I'm hopeful that our Republican colleagues will listen to it from a policy basis, not a political prism basis. But I fear that they will look at it much more from the political standpoint of not wanting this president to be successful, which is such a negative way to approach this, because if this president is successful, it will be because America is successful.
I do want to ask you about some items that are not in this plan, however. It doesn't include an expansion of Medicare. It doesn't include an overhaul of prescription drug prices. It doesn't eliminate the cap on state and local deductions. Those have been big sticking points for Democrats, and you're going to need pretty much every single Democrat to get around this bill, because it's unlikely that Republicans will support it. So how do you keep the caucus together if it doesn't include those items? And do you want to see those items included?
Caitlin, first let me say, this is the president's proposal. The legislation will be written by the Congress of the United States. The president understands that. We understand that. So his proposal is obviously going to play a very, very significant and important role in the policy that the Congress considers and hopefully adopts. But it will be the Congress that will write the legislation. And those three items that you mentioned have a lot of interest in the Congress. And they will be addressed and are being addressed by the committee. So I would be not surprised if a number of issues which are not specifically in the president's proposal right now will nevertheless be in the legislation when we pass it through the House of Representatives. And it's a give and take process. And you're right, we have a close margin. I would hope that we would get help from Republicans who believe that we still need to do things to lift the economy and lift up the Americans who are struggling. But we'll see. So the answer to your question is the president proposes, and the Congress will take his proposal very, very seriously. We will take it very seriously, and we will enact legislation which our committees believe, and the jurisdiction of many, many committees are engaged in these proposals, and we will come out with what we believe is the policy that the Congress is responsible for forging.
So it might those items might make it into the actual legislation. I also want to wanted to ask you about the child tax credit, because this is something that's expanded in the president's proposal but not permanent. A lot of Democrats want to see it made permanent. Is that something that you want to see?
I think it ought to be permanent, yes. But the president clearly he wanted to be cognizant of how much money we were spending. We've spent a lot of money, necessarily, in my opinion, and the result of which has been to keep our economy in pretty good shape. Now, when you have 10 million people who don't have jobs, that's not pretty good shape. That's not where we ought to be. But having said that, it's in much better shape than many of the economies around the world, and much better shape than we could have expected given the assault we've had from COVID-19 over the last 12, 13, 14 months. So that I think that the president wanted to stay within a certain confine, and so he made the extension, I believe, till 2025. I may be wrong on that number, but I think it's 2025. But I think most members of the Congress on the Democratic side want to see that permanent, because we want to see families be able to rely on that kind of support and with their children for a long period of time.
And you mentioned the slim margin that Democrats have in terms of control of the House. What's your outlook about next year in the midterms? How likely is it that Democrats can keep their hold on the House? Republicans seem pretty optimistic that they can overtake it.
Well, I think that's true. We were pretty optimistic that we were going to pick up 15 seats this last election, and that didn't happen, largely because, in my view, of the overwhelming turnout for Trump. Now, it wasn't the majority of the American people. Joe Biden got that. But the fact is that turnout really helped, I think, the Republicans hold seats that they had and pick up some seats that we had won in Trump districts. Although we held most of the people that we had won in Trump districts, as you probably know. But I think our political outlook is not gloomy. I frankly think we can pick up seats in the 2022 election. I think it's the historic norms of the incumbent president loses. I think Joe Biden is going to continue to be a positive a role model and a positive messenger for our country, both here at home and around the world. And I think the American public is going to respond to that. I think, frankly, the Republican Party has the narrowest base of any party in the time I've been involved in politics. I think it's a base that does not want to cooperate, does not want to see compromise, but a very hardline base. And I don't think that's going to serve the Republicans well in the next election. And I frankly think we're going to pick up seats around the country. Very frankly, the census report and the report about which states get which numbers, frankly, was not nearly as hard as I thought it was going to be on us. So okay. I think we have a good shot at both expanding our membership in the United States Senate and in the House of Representatives. I don't think that's Pollyannish. I don't think it's naive. I think it's realistic in terms of the tone that the President of the United States is setting, as opposed to the tone that was set by President Trump, by the insurrectionists, and by, frankly, the Republican Party in both the House and the Senate today. I don't think the American people think that's what they want. And as a result of that, I think democracy works, and I think they're going to vote to have a more stable, more rational, less angry, less confrontational representation in both the House and the Senate. And I think we're going to pick up seats.
And I know we're only 100 days in, but next year is the midterm year. And as you very well know, midterm politics make everything much more difficult in terms of actually passing legislation. Do you feel like the calendar is kind of shrinking at this point in terms of the number of items still on the president's agenda? We talked about infrastructure, but also there's gun legislation, climate legislation, a number of other items, immigration that the president wants to address. Is there a limited time in which he has to actually address these issues given the political dynamics?
Well, Caitlin, it's never too late to do the right thing. And I think we are doing the right thing. We had a very, very productive first quarter in the Congress of the United States and the House of Representatives. Sending legislation on all the issues that you just mentioned, sending legislation to the Senate. Now, the Senate hasn't taken it up yet, but I think it is going to take up a significant number of the bills that we have passed. The president's for them. The president will sign those bills if the Senate enacts them. They still have the filibuster. They still have that impediment to action. That roadblock, in effect, to democracy, which I frankly think they ought to jettison. I think that they ought to maintain extended debate in the Senate, but it ought not to be debate that stops the majority from making policy. The minority should not be controlling the minority should not be controlling the majority, nor should the majority be able to just run over the minority. There ought to be rules, but our founding fathers did not have any expectation that the Senate would simply be a place where the minority ruled, not the majority. We're going to be moving ahead on the American Jobs Plan, on the American Families Plan, on the legislation you talked about in terms of rational. We've sent a very common sense, supported by over 85% of America, universal background checks. So the criminals and domestic abusers and felons do not get access to weapons, essentially, that can kill people in a real hurry. That doesn't mean we want to take away the Second Amendment. We honor the Second Amendment in terms of the ability to own hunting rifles and guns for protection. But that's common sense legislation. So we've acted on that. The Senate needs to act on it, and I hope they will. But we're going to continue to pass legislation that we think is in the best interest of the people we represent, of the country's economy, the country's health, and the country's position in the world. And we're going to be passing that this year. And yes, we'll pass some of that next year as well. Will it get more difficult as the election gets closer? In some respects, you're right, but it does not mitigate against us acting.
Is there a sense, though, within the caucus, given those dynamics that you just laid out, that there's this incentive to kind of go big and bold right now, immediately act on these issues, because you don't know if Democrats will be able to hold the House and possibly the Senate after the midterms? Is there that sense within the caucus?
Well, Caitlin, I think you're right on that. I think there is that sense that going big and bold early in the president's term is the best way to go. And we've done that in the past. This is not a unique situation for this president or for Democrats per se or Republicans per se. Both parties try to do the same thing. They try to take the momentum of the last election and move forward as quickly as possible on the big issues that they campaigned on. That's what this president is doing. We're supportive of him in that effort. I think that's what the country wants done. They know the problems we confront are large, and the responses need to be equally large to be effective. So yes, the earlier we move, the better. But my point is, we're going to move as quickly as possible, but we're also going to move in a way that is considered and hopefully accurate. We're going to be careful to do the right things, and that they will affect the ends that we are seeking. So it does not mean that next year will simply be a treading water year. There'll still be problems that we need to confront, and we will do that.
And quickly, I know that we've already taken a lot of your time, but I wanted to ask about the January 6th Commission. Can you give us an update on where that stands? I know there's kind of been a stalemate in terms of moving forward with that commission. Where do things stand right now?
A lot of work is being done on that. The Speaker and we have agreed that it would be equal numbers, as was the 9/11 Commission. What we feel very strongly about is that it focus on January 6th. January 6th was a unique event in American history. It was Americans violently attempting to undermine democracy, undermine the ability of the Congress of the United States to elect a president of the United States. That is unheard of. The violence that occurred, the deaths that occurred, the threats that occurred, these insurrectionists need to be held guilty. And in my opinion, Liz Cheney was absolutely right. They were inspired by, recruited by, and deployed by the President of the United States, Donald Trump. And this commission is a critical commission to look at what is happening in America that leads to that result. The disrespect for democracy, the fantasy that somehow the election was stolen, disproven by court after court after court in America, litigated. We are a nation of laws. Al Gore said when 5 people voted to stop the election that he would honor those 5 people. They were Supreme Court justices, of course. Why? Because we're a nation of laws. What we saw on January 6th was a rejection of law, a rejection of democracy, a rejection of the truth. And we need to get at that. Our Republican friends are suggesting that we look at every demonstration that occurred last year, almost all of which were peaceful. There were some people in those demonstrations that did things that were not peaceful and were violations of law. And they ought to be investigated by the local police, the state police, and yes, even the FBI if necessary. But we ought not to distract ourselves and looking at this crisis in our democracy that occurred on January 6th and hold accountable everybody and anybody who was involved in that effort, and making sure that some of these terrorists, domestic terrorists around the country, are known, ferreted out, and dealt with in an effective way so that we can live in a country of law and order, of peace and dignity, not what we saw on January 6th, insurrectionists bent on violently overthrowing our democratic process.
And sir, I know you have to go, but just quickly, has anything surprised you in these first 100 days of the Biden administration?
I don't think anything has surprised me. I've been pleasantly, not surprised, but pleasantly reacting to the tone. I keep talking about tone because Donald Trump so coarsened the tone of our democracy. Now, he didn't invent it. It's become coarser. Social media has exacerbated it. But this president has brought a degree of a sense of responsibility, a sense of thoughtfulness, a sense of respect for one another, and empathy for the concerns of Americans that his predecessor did not. And I think that is a breath of fresh air for our country. I'm not surprised. I've known Joe Biden for over 40 years. He's been my friend, and that's who he is, and that's what he will continue to be, and that's good for America.
Sir, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and we'll look forward to the speech tonight.
Thank you, Caitlin. Good being with you.